regarding the state of the U.S. economy. Mr. Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, predicts a slow session. Slow session, yes, first time I've heard that phrase, but basically it means that we're not going to go into a full blown recession in 2023. This is his prediction. Again, he's the chief economist at Moody's Analytics. Why is he so confident? He is confident that the Fed will be able to increase interest rate enough to tamp down the inflation, but not increase it so much that it'll cause a recession. He's also confident about certain aspects of the economy with regards to increased efficiency. He is confident with regards to some of the supply side of the ledger, because as we know, recession, or shall we say inflation, is caused by too much money chasing too few goods. So there's a supply side, the goods that is, and there's a demand side, which has to do with all the money. Okay, now what is Moody's Analytics anyways? What do they do, and what's Mark Zandi's background? What are some of the facts that he gives to substantiate these claims that he's making? Okay, so we're going to look at inflation, we're going to look at the Fed action, we're going to look at the housing market, we're going to look at the jobs picture, and what have you. So if we get right into this, ladies and gentlemen, and we talk about this here, which is Moody's Analytics. Moody's Analytics is a private concern. Okay, it's a subsidiary of Moody's Corporation, and it provides economic research regarding risk performance, financial modeling, as well as consulting, training, and software services. So basically, Moody's is a place where if you're in business and you need somebody to read the economic tea leaves for you, let's say you're in the construction industry and you want to know, hey, where's the economy going? What kind of financing should I do? What kind of loan should I take? When should I expand? How should I expand? Where should I expand? Moody's Analytics is a company that gives you information with regards to that. So we're going to get right into this with Mr. Zandi, and we're going to start out here for him to give him the opportunity to describe what he means by a slow session. Let's go.
As part of that, you just put out a look at 2023, at least your estimation of where the economy is going. And as part of that, you developed a new term called slow session. Can you describe that?
Yeah, well, in my view, the next, 2023 going into 24 is going to be tough for the economy. It's not going to be easy. Inflation is high, and the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates very aggressively to try to quell the wage and price pressures, get that inflation back down to something we can feel comfortable with. So in that environment, the economy is going to struggle. But I think we have a reasonably good chance, fighting chance, of getting through the next year or so without an actual recession. Recession is a broad-based, across lots of industries, persistent, more than a few months, but a few quarters, decline in economic activity. I don't think we're going to see that, or we have a good chance of not seeing that. But it will be slow. The economy is going to be soft, so not a recession, a slow session. So I think that better describes kind of the path forward for the economy, at least in my view.
Well, we know that in 2020, one thing that happened is that the definition of a recession was kind of tampered with. It was said that, hey, typically negative growth in 2 consecutive quarters, negative growth in 2 consecutive quarters, negative GDP, that is, right? Negative GDP growth in 2 consecutive quarters is what a recession was defined as. But given the strange times that we're in, okay, we have said, hey, maybe there are different ways to look at the data. And this happens from time to time, okay? We no longer talk about depressions. It got changed to recessions. Over the period, I believe in the 70s, is when President Nixon, or was it, President Nixon told the then Fed chairman that, we cannot use depression anymore. You have to change it to something else. So the words are the words, but basically we're talking about an economic contraction here. An economic contraction is what this is about. And he is saying that he is confident about it. Now, what gives him such confidence? Let's get into some of the data here. Let's talk about the interest rates for a second. Let's talk about what the Fed is doing and how this will affect his outlook.
Mr. Zandi, you talked about the Fed. You talked about its attitude towards rates. We'll see rates, but maybe not as high this coming year. And if that's the case, what does that reflect as far as the Fed's confidence in what it's doing?
Well, the Fed's going to raise rates more, Pedro. They obviously increased interest rates very aggressively last year in 2022. It's hard to believe, but you go back to this time last year, the federal funds rate target, that's the interest rate the Federal Reserve directly controls. So that was at close to zero. Now it's sitting somewhere 4.25.
The rate was close to zero. And just so we get some context here, that rate was close to zero for a very long time. In other words, what that means is there was free money for those close to capital. right? For the banksters and the hedge fund managers, or shall we say the venture capitalists and all those other people who are close to money. The fund rate, the Fed's fund rate was close to zero. A lot of free money flowing into all kinds of ventures. This helps a lot of economic growth, but unfortunately, it also helps to buoy up certain dead companies that should not exist. We have zombie companies that are just living off of very low interest rates and not really providing value. Okay. And now, within a year, okay, from close to zero, we are approaching what I believe is 5%. Okay, I believe 5% is the terminal rate, but let me get that let me get that straight here from Mr. Zandi here.
Quarter, 4.5%. So that's a
4.25%, I believe. Let's go back there.
rate target. That's the interest rate the Federal Reserve directly controls. So that was at close to zero. Now it's sitting somewhere 4.25%, 4.5%.
Okay, so 4.5%, not so far off. I was. Go ahead.
So that's a pretty big change in a pretty short period of time. And the Federal Reserve is signaling very strongly that it will continue to raise rates here early in 2023. So investors, financial markets are expecting the Fed to raise rates another 0.5 percentage point over the next couple, 3 months. So by spring, the federal funds rate target, which was at 0 a year ago, will be close to 5%. And just for context, the best estimates of the interest rate that's consistent with not supporting the economy or not restraining the economy is 2.5%. So the rate we're going to here in the next few months is double that rate, consistent with the policy that's kind of neutral with respect to the economy. And so the Fed is working really hard to bring in that inflation. Now, after that, it's hard to know what has to happen is inflation has to come in for the Fed to stop raising interest rates. I think that is going to happen. I think that's the most likely scenario, but if I'm wrong and inflation continues to remain high and persistent, the Fed will have to raise rates even more later this year. So higher rates are coming. It's just a question of how much higher they're going to go.
How much higher they're going to go. And he's rather confident, as he will continue to express, that the inflation, as we're starting to see some of the goods side of the inflation, like your gasoline prices, some of the food prices that you're paying, is starting to come down. Okay, we peaked around 9% last year. About May of last year, I believe we were approaching 9%. Now we're at 7%. Okay, the Fed is continuing to do its thing, trying to suck out that liquidity, suck out that free money, okay, that was kind of sloshing around and for the decades of close to 0% interest rate, sucking that out so that the inflation can come down. And he's confident that the inflation will come down enough that the Fed will not have to break things with its interest rate increase. But how about the housing market and certain other things, okay, which we will get into momentarily. But one quick thing here politically, okay, on the political side of things, is that every now and again, the federal government has to increase its debt ceiling. Okay, what's a debt ceiling? Well, basically just means that it makes good fiscal sense, good fiscal policy for you, either a home or a business or the federal government, to set a debt ceiling to say, hey, we are not going to have a debt above this percentage of our income, for example, or you have a fixed number. Like we cannot have a debt over $10,000 or $10 trillion, depending on the kind of game you're playing, right? And then every now and again, okay, given the fact that governments are inflationary, we're in an inflationary fiat system, the federal government has to increase the debt ceiling, okay? And this is something that has to be done by Congress, and it is typically the political football game happens, okay? Now, it is always the case that they always end up increasing it, but we know how politicians are. They're there for attention, and they're going to use any kind of opportunity, especially like this, to say, hey, we're not going to raise the debt ceiling until you give us what we want. So the Republicans in the House right now will be saying, hey, Joe Biden, we're not going to allow you to raise the debt ceiling until you give us what we want. So let's have a little bit of a word on that debt ceiling front, and then we'll continue getting back into aspects of the economy here, why he is so confident about the efficiencies and why he's so confident that we're not going to go into a full-blown recession.
Good morning, Mark and Pedro. My question is, the Republicans are talking about busting through the debt ceiling, not raising it, and how will that affect my retirement, my pension, and my investments?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It would be catastrophic, to your investments, to your wealth. So, so catastrophic. And let me just step back for a second just to make this more clear. The debt limit obviously is the limit on the amount of Treasury debt that can be outstanding, and we are now bumping up against that limit. If we hit the limit and the Treasury runs out of all the cash that it has in its bank accounts, it can't issue more bonds, more Treasury bonds to help finance the government's spending and tax policy. Someone's not going to get.
Bonds are debt, right? Bonds, when you buy a bond, like from a company, like private bonds, that means you're giving the company money. If you have Apple bonds, you're giving Apple money, you're loaning Apple money, and Apple pays you a certain interest, right? Bonds are more secure than stock, okay? Bonds are more secure than stock. As a matter of fact, if a company goes bankrupt, the bondholders get their money back first. They're first in line before you get to the equity people. A stock means you own a piece of the company. Now, you can get more return from a stock, right? There's a higher upside and a higher downside. Let's say there's more risk and therefore more reward, but a bond is a debt, a loan that you give to a company. Same thing. The Treasury sells bonds by which it funds itself, the federal government, that is, right? So when you buy a bond, you're loaning money to the federal government. This is what he's talking about the Treasury bonds. Now, the debt to GDP ratio of the federal government is something that is constantly going up. People say, hey, at this number, it'll bust. At that number, it'll bust. But it seems to be inflating and inflating, right? The debt to GDP ratio is, debt keeps getting bigger. And as long as there's certain things such as a strong military and good soft power, and as long as people have faith, okay, in the system, then it'll continue to work. However, if this debt ceiling is not raised and the Treasury runs out of money, if you will, then that faith in the system will decline, or will go to zero, basically. And that's why it never happens. Okay, it never happens that the debt ceiling is not increased, but every now and again it has to be increased, and political football matches made out of it. Let's continue.
Get paid. The Treasury can't cut a check to somebody. It could be a Social Security recipient. It could be someone in the military. It could be bondholders. Yeah, people who own the Treasury bonds. From you. You may have that in your pension plan to foreign investors, Middle Eastern investors, Japanese investors, Chinese investors. So if someone doesn't get paid, then that's going to send a bomb throughout the global financial system, because one of the bedrock principles of a well-functioning global financial system is that the U.S. pays its debts. It pays its debts on time, so it's risk-free. So if you buy a bond from the U.S. Treasury, you're going to get your money back and interest, no question.
U.S. pays its debts. Buying a bond means you're giving the U.S. a loan. The U.S. has to pay its debts. Hence, it has to increase its debt ceiling from time to time. But let's get back to the point here. Let's get back to the inflation story. Why is he so confident that the inflation is, why does he trust the Fed so much that the Fed will be able to increase the interest rate just enough to curb inflation, but not so much that it hurts the economy in a way that we can call a recession? He's choosing to call it a slow recession. Let's get back to that point.
Mr. Zandi, a lot of people who call this program take a look at inflation through the lens of how much gasoline prices are, or how much food prices are, even specifics to how much the price of eggs are. How do you factor those into an economic picture, particularly for those who don't follow economics like you follow economics?
Yeah, that's a great point, Pedro. I think the one thing that most people really focus on to try to gauge where inflation is and how big it is the cost of a gallon of regular unleaded. I think that's the kind of the litmus test for most people. And that's pretty clear why. For most people, you see that every single day, right? If you're driving to work or going to school, going shopping, you're driving by your local gasoline station and you're looking at that price. And good news there. One reason to be more optimistic that inflation is going to continue to come in, and we can avoid that. The Fed doesn't have to raise rates that high, and we can avoid a recession. We're back down to close to $3 for a gallon of regular unleaded. Again, remember back in June.
Again, he's talking about the inflation of certain goods, some of the goods that is most important to the daily lives of people in the United States. But there's something else, which I'll leave a link to our previous video where we talked about the core services inflation. Okay, services remains high, goods are coming down, but services, including salaries, especially for lower wage workers, stays up. And that makes it such that, things such as your Uber ride is still going to be expensive, and your DoorDash service bills are still going to be expensive, right? But things like your eggs and gasoline is coming down.
Of last year at the all-time high as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the sanctions, we hit $5 on the nose, literally on the nose. That was a record high. We're now back down to $3. $3 is pretty good. That's, we were at 3 right before Russia began to invade. Became clear that Russia was going to begin to invade Ukraine. I think if everything was absolutely perfect and functioning really well, probably we'd be at $2.50, $2.75, something like that. But we're at 3, and it continues to move lower. Oil prices are going lower, and a lot of cross currents here too. Obviously the sanctions on Russian oil are, all else being equal, pushing up prices. But we're seeing a weak Chinese economy because China consumes and demands a lot of oil. That demand is down, and that's weighing against oil prices. Also, here at home, we're getting
China is going to open up. China is opening up again from its full lockdown, and that demand for oil is going to go up.
More efficient. I mean, just to give you a sense of that, if you go back before the pandemic, we as a nation, we were consuming 21 million barrels of oil a day. That's about 1/5 of all the oil consumed across the globe. Today, we're consuming about 20 million barrels a day. So we've reduced our consumption of oil since before the pandemic by 1 million barrels per day. That's pretty consequential, and that's another reason why we're seeing downward pressure on oil prices.
So efficiency in the system is one of the reasons why he has confidence. He also has confidence in the Fed in terms of their action. Well, he's not saying that it's 100% confidence. He could be wrong, right? He knows that he could be wrong with regards to his prediction of a slow session, right? Where basically we're not going to go into a full-blown recession. Now, housing is a place that we're going to end up here, because housing is going to be greatly affected by these high interest rates, especially given the fact that people have been living in a situation where the Fed's funds rate was 0%, meaning that you could get like 2.5%, 3% interest rate, 30-year interest rate on your mortgage. But these days we're around 6%. We'll get to that in a second, but let him continue to explain the efficiencies and why he's confident.
And gasoline prices, but that's the key price I think that most people focus on. One other quick point, Pedro. Oil prices and their impact on diesel prices also is critical to food prices, because a big part of the cost of food that we pay, those eggs you mentioned, or milk, or meat, or whatever it is, vegetables, that the cost of that, a lot of that is the cost of getting it from the farm, the ranch, to the store shelf. And so if diesel prices are high, then food prices are going to be high. But good news there too is that diesel prices are,
hey, cute dog over there in the corner,
starting to come in. Obviously, a lot of risk around what's going on with oil prices. They can go back up very quickly here, but for the moment, feels pretty good, Pedro. $3 a gallon, that feels like a pretty good price. And I think people are feeling a little bit better about inflation right now as a result.
Okay, so the consumer price index, the number for the goods, right, getting low. And he's talking about energy in terms of oil prices being low, and that's going to affect the food prices that we see. We have reduced the amount of oil in America that we consume. Things are seeming to be more efficient, right? Things are seeming to be more efficient. And perhaps that reduction in the consumption of oil has to do with the fact that more people are working from home. As a matter of fact, I believe that the 5 days at the office is a thing of the past for the most part. 5 days at the office is a thing of the past. And for some jobs, you're going to be completely remote now, okay? Because I think that a lot of companies are seeing that, hey, we do have, there can be a way of perhaps using fewer staff, finding the rock star staff that can actually be self-motivated and work from home, and all this other kind of good stuff. What's going on with the jobs picture, though? What's going on with the jobs picture? How does his model of a slow session, not a full-blown recession, fit with what we're seeing with the jobs? Let's see if we can find that here.
Mr. Zandi, you did talk about jobs. December numbers came out last week, 3.9% unemployment rate, 199,000 jobs added. What did you make of those numbers?
I thought they were very good. In going back into that context of the Fed wants to raise rates high enough, fast enough to slow things down, but not raise rates so high, so fast that it undermines the economy. That jobs report, that job number was pretty consistent with that effort. I mean, job growth is slow.
Again, his main thing is the Fed's, in addition to all the other things he's mentioned, right? He's talking about efficiency. He's talking about things that are going on the supply side, such as with China and Russia, both the supply and the demand side. We're talking about all kinds of things, but also that the Feds are going to get it right, increasing the interest rate to curb down the inflation, but not hurting the jobs, okay? Not hurting the jobs. And that seems to be the case so far. Unemployment is very low. Okay, we have a great employment situation, but let's continue with this.
Numbers.
I thought they were very good. In going back into that context of the Fed wants to raise rates high enough, fast enough to slow things down, but not raise rates so high, so fast that it undermines the economy. That jobs report, that job number was pretty consistent with that effort. I mean, job growth is slowing very definitively. So if you go back a year ago, the economy was creating 500, 600,000 jobs per month on average. We're now seeing job growth that's about half that, somewhere between 200 and 250,000. And all of the other, if you look really deep into the numbers like I do, you can kind of down into the bowels of the data, you can see there are all the leading indicators of future job growth indicate that job growth is going to continue to slow here. That sounds weird to people that, oh, I'm rooting for slow job growth. And typically I wouldn't be. You want jobs. But right now the economy is very low unemployment, a 50-year low, 3.5% unemployment rate.
Yeah, so we don't want the jobs growth to happen too much because that's going to just continue to feed into the inflation picture, which is going to continue to keep the Fed pumping up the interest rate. Make sense, right? If the job market remains strong and more jobs keep getting added, more people are going to keep on spending, prices are going to keep on going up. The Feds are going to keep on trying to tamper that price down because runaway inflation is not a good thing for anybody, okay? We, generally speaking, are willing for some people to lose their jobs in order to bring inflation down rather than for inflation to run away with us. So that's the basic idea that he's pointing out here.
Slow job growth, and typically it wouldn't be. You want jobs. But right now the economy is very low unemployment, a 50-year low, 3.5% unemployment rate. Labor market is very tight. A lot of businesses are having trouble finding qualified workers, and that goes to the inflationary pressure. So at this point in time, where we are today, it's better if we see some slowing in job growth. We don't want to see job losses. We don't want to see significant increases in layoffs, but we do want to see a moderation in job growth. And that was the message in that jobs report. That in fact is exactly what's happening. We need to see a lot more of it, Pedro, but I'll take it. That felt pretty good last Friday, and that's why the stock market, I don't know if you noticed, but that had a very good day last Friday because of the stock investors interpreted the numbers just like I did, just like I do.
Also having a good day today stock wise, the stock market is having a good little rally here on Monday the 9th of January 2023. Let's close this out with the housing situation. As we mentioned, okay, the interest rate is going to be directly tied to the housing situation. The housing situation is going to be an area where indeed there's going to be a recession. Now, a recession has to do, before you call it a general economic recession, it has to cover more than just one segment or one sector of the economy. So it is the housing sector that will be hurt. Okay. People are used to very low interest rate. Fed funds rate was 0%. You could get 2 or 3% mortgages a few years ago. Now we're at 6%. Also, by the way, the housing market, in terms of the prices of houses, shot right up, okay? Right before 2020, housing prices shot right up, and they haven't really come down. So you have high prices and high interest rate. That's going to be interesting. That's the interesting wrinkle here in the rosy picture that is being painted by Mr. Zandi. Again, Mr. Mark Zandi is the chief economist at Moody's Analytics, who's a private company that provides economic analytic information to private organizations so that they can read the tea leaves and understand where to go with regard to the expansion and their financing and whatnot. Let's hear a little bit about the housing market.
Probably the best interest rate to illustrate that is the mortgage rate, right? The 30-year fixed rate mortgage rate. And that is sitting at about 6.5%. And, for anyone who's been in the job market for the last, probably the last 15, 20 years, that feels pretty high, right? And in fact, if you go back a year ago when interest rates were at their low, you could get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage loan for probably 2.5%, 2.75%. That was the all-time record low, and now here we are at 6.5%. So that feels very uncomfortable, and it's a problem for many potential home buyers, right? Because when rates are very low, that create a lot of demand for homes, and that juiced up house prices. So here's a statistic for you: between February 20, the month before the pandemic hit, to June of last year, which was the peak in house prices, they rose 40%. 40%.
Housing prices rose 40%, haven't come down, and now interest rates have more than doubled. 30-year mortgage rates, that is.
So with that surge in house prices, now you combine that with a 6.5% mortgage rate, housing is just not affordable, right? If you go get a mortgage at 6.5 at these house prices, your mortgage payment is $700-800 more a month than it was about a year ago, right? And that's for most people not affordable. So the 6.5% feels pretty uncomfortable, even though it's low. You're right, Brenda, by historical standards. If you go back into the 70s and 80s, we were seeing mortgage rates that were well into the double digits. So it's much lower than that, but still a lot higher than most people are used to. And at 6.5%, that's still doing a lot of damage to the housing market.
And Mr. Zandi, it was the National Association of Realtors who put out in December that existing home sales dipped 7.7%. That was in November. Is that something to watch? Is that a cause for concern?
Well, that's to my point. I mean,
Makes sense, right? You didn't even have to see the stats. As a matter of fact, the stats, 7.7% dip in the purchases, the demand, if you will, of homes is seems rather low. I think that the other shoe will drop definitely in 2023. I predict that the housing market is where you're really going to see the recession, even if, as he's mentioning, the job markets will be great, even if, as he mentioned before, you trust in the Fed and their ability to raise the interest rates enough to curb inflation, right? The goods inflation, while not damaging the employment picture. Let us continue.
6.5% plus these high house prices, affordability, mortgage payments have jumped, affordability has collapsed. People can't afford this, so sales have fallen, demand has fallen, and that is the housing. Single-family housing is the weakest part of the economy, which, Pedro, it shouldn't be a surprise, right? I mean, again, the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates in an effort to slow down, cool off the economy. And the most interest rate sensitive sectors of the economy are going to feel that hardest, right? And nothing.
The most interest rate sensitive sectors of the economy are going to feel that. Housing is one of them. The other one is tech. Okay, tech in terms of because tech is where you build new things, right? It makes sense. Okay, when you talk about Silicon Valley, you're talking about startups. Startups in Silicon Valley, the tech industry, are synonymous. You hear tech industry, Silicon Valley, you hear startups. Okay, and when you're doing something that's a startup, you need funding, right? You need funding from venture capitalists, and these people are very sensitive to interest rates. So rather than give you money that is, give you a money in a high risk venture such as a startup, when the Fed increases the interest rate, they rather just go buy some bonds. They can get 5% on a bond or something. So why? I mean, I could get guaranteed 5% at the safest bet that I can make, which is loan money to the government, or I can buy some private bonds in some really good companies like Apple, right? Why would I give you, Mr. Startup guy in the tech industry, to $20 million for your Series A funding round or something like that? So we're starting to see these areas that are very sensitive to interest rates, such as startups. Right, we are seeing what's going on there. The bubbles are bursting everywhere, including the crypto stuff with FTX and Celsius and whatnot, but also the fact that Facebook and Google and Salesforce are laying people off, and a lot of startups are going to be feeling the pinch continuing as we go into 2023. But just wanted to mention that fact, in addition to the fact that the housing market is also another area, the, shall we say, single family homes, another area that is very sensitive to interest rates. Same thing going on also with commercial interest rates, by the way, in places like San Francisco, but that's a slightly different story with some other factors and inputs going into it.
More interest rate sensitive than housing, because for most of us, if we want to go buy a home, we got to get a mortgage, and it's a large amount of debt, and those mortgage payments are very high. So very, very sensitive to moves in interest rates. So housing is in recession. It is contracting. That part of the economy is going backwards. Sales are down, home building is down, and of course house prices are now starting to fall in many parts of.
We get the idea. Housing is in recession. Housing is in recession. So what are your thoughts about what Mr. Zandi has to say? He is saying that we're going to be in a slow session, not a full-blown recession. And he gave the reasons why he thinks this. He thinks that, hey, he trusts in the Fed's ability to raise the interest rates enough to keep the inflation in check, but not raise it enough to break things in the economy. And as a way of evidencing this, he showed that, hey, we are using less oil. And as a result, we are seeing the goods such as eggs and, the gasoline for sure, the prices are coming down. So inflation is getting checked in that regard. And the eggs and the bread and all that kind of stuff that depends on the gasoline for transportation, that price is coming down. Now, core services inflation is high still. Core services inflation, in other words, the services aspect of inflation is still high. Okay. And he added other factors like the jobs market being great, and that he's not foreseeing that the jobs market is going to go so bad. But we don't want it to be so great, because as it continues to be great, okay, if more jobs keep getting added, then the inflation will continue to go up, leading to more Fed increase in the interest rate, which will then lead to possibly something breaking in the economy. But finally, we looked at the housing picture. The housing picture is not so good, okay? The housing prices went up about 40%, have not come down, but the interest rates have more than doubled. So it's a catastrophic thing that's going on right now. Close to 8% reduction in the demand for new housing. So what are your thoughts, ladies and gentlemen? What do you think about this slow session prediction? Or do you think we're going to go into a full-blown recession? What do you think about the facts that he gave in order to buttress his point, to substantiate his point? Again, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned here for your geopolitical and economic updates, okay? Geopolitical, economic updates, information given to you in a simple, measurable, actionable manner. My name is Ike Ogiamin. Until next time, peace. We are gone.